The Silk of Vengeance, deconstructing the fall of the Forrester dynasty. In the gilded world of high fashion, where empires are built on silk and secrets, the Forrester name has long stood as a monument to glamour, ambition, and tumultuous passion. Yet, beneath the veneer of couture and red carpet galas, a darker thread has always run through the family's tapestry, one of betrayal, heartbreak, and the kind of long-simmering resentment that can curdle into a potent poison. This is the story of how that poison was finally administered, leading to the cataclysmic fall of its titan, Ridge Forrester, and how from the ashes of tragedy, a dynasty was forced to confront the unvarnished truths it had spent a generation avoiding. It is a saga not just of a crime, but of a son's twisted love, a mother's impossible choice, and the devastating reckoning that followed. Part 1. The Genesis of a Shadow. Every dynasty has its ghosts, and for the Forresters, a new one was taking shape in the periphery, cloaked in leather and regret. This was not a specter from the past, but a living, breathing shadow named Jack Spencer. The world knew Ridge Forrester as the charismatic, formidable head of a fashion empire, but Jack saw him through a different lens, the lens of a small camera, and more importantly, the lens of a son who had watched his mother, Brooke Logan, have her heart broken by this man time and again. Jack, the son born from Brooke's first marriage to Nick, was a product of the Forrester-Logan storm. He was raised with the intimate knowledge that in their world, loyalty was a currency that could easily be devalued, and that love, if stirred by betrayal, could transform into the bitterest form of vengeance. For years, he had been a silent witness, a collector of his mother's pain. His surveillance of the sprawling Forrester estate was a meticulous, almost sacred ritual. Long before the first hints of dawn slipped through the opulent windows, Jack was in position, his camera documenting every whispered conversation, every stolen glance, every heartbeat that pulsed through Ridge Forrester's world of silk and ambition. He captured it all, the confidence with which Ridge signed multi-million-dollar deals at his mahogany desk, a confidence that seemed to evaporate in his personal life. He captured the tender, private smiles Ridge reserved for Brooke in moments he thought no one else noticed, smiles that made his eventual betrayals all the more cutting. And most recently, Jack had captured the steely resolve that furrowed Ridge's brow when he learned Brooke's heart had been broken yet again, a hollow, hypocritical display that fueled Jack's own resolve. The return of Taylor had reopened old wounds, not just for Brooke, but for the son who felt every one of her tears as his own. Ridge's casual infidelity had shattered Brooke's faith, his flippant vows becoming daggers in her soul. Unbeknownst to Ridge, this relentless gaze, this obsessive documentation, was compiling a damning portfolio. It was not for blackmail or corporate espionage. It was the gathering of evidence for a trial that would never see a courtroom. It was the case for the prosecution against a man adored by the world, yet blind to the destruction he left strewn through the lives of those he claimed to love. Jack's father, Nick, had wounded him in his own ways, but now his mother had been wounded by Ridge. In those wounds lay a promise darker than any corporate rivalry, the promise of retribution. Part 2. The Fall of a Titan. The night of the Forrester Gala was a spectacle of success. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the hum of self-congratulation. It was on this night, under the glittering chandeliers, that Jack Spencer's simmering plan reached its boiling point. As the celebrations wound down, Ridge Forrester, the untouchable patriarch, slipped behind the wheel of his vintage Jaguar, a symbol of his classic, enduring power. He was a man who believed he was invincible. Jack was determined to prove otherwise. Hidden beneath a willow beside the winding coastal road that led back to Los Angeles, Jack was already in position. He had watched Ridge's sleek taillights drift toward the horizon, the roar of the powerful engine a fading challenge to the darkness. Then, with the cold precision of a man who has rehearsed a moment 1,000 times in his mind, he crept beneath the car. His act was the final, irreversible step in his campaign of vengeance, the careful severing of the brake cable. He was an artist of destruction, leaving just enough metal intact to look like simple wear and tear to an untrained eye. As he worked, Jack's heart pounded with a sickening thrill, a mixture of cold resolve and the terrifying exhilaration of a boundary crossed. He tightened the last clamp and vanished into the underbrush, a ghost disappearing before a single oncoming headlight could betray his presence. By the time Ridge realized something was catastrophically wrong, it was too late. On a curve notorious among locals for fatal accidents, the brakes failed. The world spun into chaos. Ridge's car careened off the guardrail and plunged down a rocky embankment, bursting into a column of flame upon impact. The Titan had fallen. Miles away, Jack Spencer, the silent architect of this tragedy, felt the shockwave of his actions. He had reshaped the Forrester legacy with a single, brutal act. The news exploded through social circles like a bomb. The emergency crews arrived to a horrific scene of twisted metal and a windshield shattered like fragile glass. To the police, it was just another late-night crash, tragically fueled by haste or distraction. There was no initial sign of foul play. Ridge Forrester, the man whose charisma had shaped empires, was pronounced dead at the scene. The grief that followed was a tidal wave. Brooke Logan collapsed in hysterics, her world reduced to rubble. Thomas and Steffi, his children from other marriages, wept in raw disbelief, their father stolen from them in a flash of violence. Eric Forrester, the stoic patriarch of the house that bore his name, slid into a stunned, motionless silence, the weight of his grief a physical force pinning him down. The fashion world mourned a visionary. Clients canceled orders, and reporters descended upon the Forrester estate, hungry for every tragic detail. But hidden in the shadows, Jack Spencer watched it all, his victory shrouded in a terrible, suffocating secrecy. His heart pounded with the knowledge that Ridge's final breath had been drawn not by fate or error, but by his own hand. Part 3. The Unraveling of a Secret. In the days that followed Ridge's funeral, a restless hush settled over the Forrester estate. The halls that had once echoed with laughter and ambition were now haunted by silence. But for Brooke, grief was quickly giving way to a gnawing suspicion. Her maternal instinct, a well of intuition refined by decades of weathering emotional storms, whispered to her that there was more to this calamity than mere mechanical failure. She began her own quiet investigation, starting in Ridge's study. There, she rifled through his personal effects, seeking solace in the memories of the man she had loved and lost. Among the pens and ledger books, she found a half-written letter addressed to her, its words laden with apology and a longing for a future they would now never have. It wasn't a suicide note, but the words of a man looking forward, making her doubt the narrative of a simple, tragic accident. Her children, too, felt the pull of inconsistency. Steffi, haunted by guilt that her own fractious relationship with Ridge may have inadvertently distracted him in his final hours, conducted her own inquiries. Under the cover of her newly assumed role as acting head of design, she accessed security footage from the private gates of the estate, enlisting the help of a former police forensics colleague to analyze the data. They cross-referenced car entries and scoured hours of tape. Late one night, illuminated by the ghostly glow of monitors, Steffi froze the frame on a fleeting second of footage. It showed a lone figure slinking near Ridge's car just before the accident. She and Thomas also discovered Ridge's preliminary design notes for the Galanite, which included a detailed sketch of his vintage Jaguar. On the drawing of the brake cable, there was a faint, inexplicable smudge of grease. Her fingertips traced it, a cold dread seeping into her. The line on the drawing matched exactly the subtle abrasion Ridge must have felt in his last moments of control. The investigation took a horrifying turn when her private investigator delivered his report. It included a distant, hazy photograph from the surveillance footage, but it was enough to narrow the suspect to someone of medium build, someone who knew the estate's routines well enough to operate unseen. The profile was chillingly familiar. As her breath caught in her throat, she knew this was no accident. Somewhere, hidden behind the guise of grief, was a deliberate act of betrayal, and a member of their own circle was at its center. Thomas, ever the pragmatist, insisted on an autopsy, pressing for a more thorough forensic examination. The combined evidence began to paint a terrifying picture. The silhouette in the photo, slender and determined, moved with the same stealth Steffi had seen in the grainy recordings. The final piece fell into place when Thomas, looking at the enhanced photo, recognized the unmistakable profile, Jack's jawline, and the slope of his shoulders, matching exactly the silhouette they had been tracking. The revelation hit Brooke like a thunderclap. Jack, her son, had not only documented Ridge's every move, he had orchestrated his final derailment. Part 4. The Reckoning. The confrontation was inevitable, a storm that had been gathering since the day of the crash. Brooke found Jack waiting in the greenhouse, Ridge's favorite sanctuary, where orchids bloomed like silent witnesses under the moonlight. He stood beside a marble fountain, the water's gentle trickle at odds with the tempest in his eyes. "You crossed a line, Jack," Brooke said, her voice cracking. "You took his life." And Jack's reply was a choked vow. "I gave him what he gave us." His features carved with anguish, Jack pulled a memory card from his jacket. It contained the incriminating footage, the final proof of his crime. He confessed everything. He spoke of years of feeling sidelined by Ridge's insensitivity, of the endless nights he'd spent watching his mother's tears, of a vow he'd made to himself to exact justice for every broken promise Ridge had woven into their lives. His confession was brutal, his tears unbidden. He described how his love for his mother had transformed into a rage he could barely control, something he scarcely recognized in himself. When it was done, he laid the memory card on a gleaming oak table and, without another word, turned and walked out, leaving the Forrester legacy fractured and bleeding. The evidence quickly leaked, not to the press, but within the fractured family. Steffi's rash decision to show it to Eric, Thomas's insistence on handing it to the police, and Brooke's anguished plea that they handle it internally turned the Forrester estate into a battleground of conflicting loyalties. Eric was torn between his profound grief for his son and a complicated love for the grandson who had committed this act. Thomas, determined that justice be served visibly, risked fracturing the family's public image forever. Steffi, furious with Jack, yet sympathetic to the pain that drove him, found herself caught in an impossible moral trap. And at the center of it all was Brooke. She stood before the assembly of her broken family, designers, lawyers, friends, under the grand chandelier that had crowned so many happier celebrations. With a voice both trembling and resolute, she offered not an apology, but a reckoning. "This family has loved and lost, betrayed and forgiven, but never before have we been tested like this," she began, her words silencing the room. "Jack Spencer is not a monster. He is my son, driven to a desperate act by wounds I should have healed." She paused, the chandelier's light fracturing in the tears that filled her eyes. "We will handle this ourselves. No headlines. No scandal. Jack will seek help, and we will stand by him. But Ridge's death will not be swept under the rug. We will honor his memory by remaking ourselves in truth, not in secrets." Part 5. A Future Clothed in Forgiveness. As dawn broke over Los Angeles, Brooke lingered in the empty boardroom. The first light glinted off the sketches of tomorrow's trends that now seemed to map not just dresses, but the contours of her family's rebirth. She thought of Ridge, his laughter, his flaws, his love, and felt the ache of loss, now tempered by a new resolve to build something new from the rubble. A family no longer sustained by secrets, but by the unvarnished truths that bind hearts together, however painfully. Outside, the city stirred, oblivious to the drama that had played out behind closed doors. Vengeance had nearly destroyed them all, but in a strange alchemy of confession and compassion, something else had emerged. In the hush that followed, Jack stepped forward, his hood dropped, his face exposed to the very people he had spied upon. He told them his story, the rage, the love, the brutal confession, and in their shared grief, a new chapter waited to be written. The Forrester dynasty, once poised on the brink of collapse, had chosen a different path. They had chosen to weave their future not from the silk of ambition or the velvet of lies, but from the rarest and most powerful silk of all, forgiveness. Thanks for watching this videos. Please hit the subscribe button for more updated news.